Hello and welcome to the Fit and Healthy Athlete Show. Today, I have a guest with me today. Dr. Melissa MacDonald is a graduate of Northwestern Health Sciences University, where she earned her Doctor of Chiropractic, a fellow chiropractor. She then spent 2 years of specialty training in the Human Performance Center, where she focused her research and clinical skills on specific testing and treatment protocols. And this is really important because today we're going to talk a lot about knee injuries and different types of injuries that especially female athletes have a tendency to get and why that is. Additionally, Dr. Mac is the team chiropractor for MN Roller Derby, River City Rhythms, a drum corps international, which is really cool, and also the MN Vixen, a professional women's football team. So Dr. Mac has achieved both international and national certifications as a chiropractic sport provider. She's a faculty member at Northwestern Health Sciences University, where she teaches emergency procedures, and she's also a speaker on sports chiropractic issues in health and wellness in the United States as well as abroad. So now she also hosts, this is going to be good too, because you'll have to pop over to her podcast as well, because we're going to do an episode with me too at the Mac Performance Podcast, the health and wellness podcast that will whiplash you into health. So Dr. Melissa, welcome.
Hi, I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. Oh my goodness. Let's just start off with we've heard your bio, but give us a little details. Who are you? How'd you get into chiropractic? How did you get into doing what you do? Let's just start there.
Absolutely. So I grew up knowing I wanted to be in the medical field. I just didn't know where. And initially, I wanted to be a surgeon because we all grew up watching Grey's Anatomy and oh my God, I want to find my Mr. McDreamy. I want to be a surgeon. Then I shadowed actual surgeons and I was like, ew, this is not the same thing. And I really struggled with finding my path because I was like, I want to take care of the whole person, and surgery, you have to almost dehumanize them because you have to be able to cut them open. And I was like, I don't like that.
Yeah.
So I started searching. My mother, who is actually a physical therapist, went, you know what? Why don't you look into chiropractic? And I was like, I found that really interesting now looking back on it. Why was my mother, who's a physical therapist, telling me to go into chiropractic? But it was the autonomy that a chiropractor has. It's the ability to be independent, not have to require referrals, and be able to take care of the person as a whole without having necessarily medical oversight. Because at the time she practiced, the MDs would hey, this is the path. This is what you are going to do. And she's like, you would hate that. You need to be able to do your own thing. And I was like, awesome. So I started looking at it, settled on Northwestern, and started my chiropractic journey. Now, I didn't get into sports until towards the end of my chiropractic path. I initially wanted to be a radiologist. And then again, realized, I don't like not having the answer of what happens after I read and give a horrible thing. And was like, no, this isn't me. And then someone was like, hey, why don't you come shadow me on a sideline? And I was like, oh, I've never done that. That sounds fun. And oh my God, the adrenaline. My first ever sideline, an athlete dislocated and spiral fractured their humerus. And I was like, I don't know what to do. This is horrible. I want to do it more. And I became an EMT, and that just started my journey that is now 6 years long of sidelines every week, working with athletes and figuring out how do I prevent those bad things from happening so that I don't have to deal with them. Because I want to go watch sports. I don't want to have to work at a game.
Sure. And it's so interesting too, because when you really start to look at it, there's a lot of injuries that athletes get that are actually really preventable from many different ways of looking at it. Like whether you're looking at mobility and, PT and all of those types of things and movement patterns to then strength, which kind of gets incorporated in that, to then inflammation and nutrition and a lot of those types of things as well. So it's really, I love that journey that you got in, how you got into sports and chiropractic and all of that. So I'm just curious, were you into sports when you grew up at all?
I did. So I was a competitive swimmer when I was younger. I grew up in Florida. So I competitively swam from 7 to 13. And then my parents were like, ew, Florida's getting a little rough. We want to raise our children where we have 4 seasons. And they moved us to the middle of nowhere, Michigan. And there wasn't any swimming. So then I switched to volleyball and then participating in track because I am not a runner. I threw things. That was my thing.
Okay.
So I threw things really far. And then in college, I actually did some Scottish Highland dancing.
Oh, how fun. How fun. Oh my gosh. What so many interesting things, so many different things.
Yeah, I mean, it's all gonna scream a little ADHD, which I fully admit to having, because I was like, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that. Now I'm into weightlifting and powerlifting, and
Yes.
that has really been my happy place, is
Cool.
lifting heavy things and putting it back down again.
Yeah, that was a surprising thing that I got into in my 20s that I didn't realize was something that I really enjoyed. It was just like the ability to push past like if you'd been stuck right at a weight for a certain amount of time and then finally breaking past that and knowing that you like not only got stronger but you can potentially, lift up bags of dog food and you can, oh my gosh. Okay. Crazy story. Before we get into like all of the things, one caveat story. So there was a time when I was helping unload like a vehicle or a van or a bus or something. And I picked up one of those Costco, like water, they're like all the water bottles in there. They're pretty heavy and they're kind of awkward. I just lifted the thing up and put it on my shoulder. And I remember some dude being like, are you sure you should be doing that? Like, that seems really heavy. And I just kind of looked at him and I was like, I appreciate the concern, but this is also like, this is very light for me based on like all of the things that I do. And I actually train so that I can do stuff like this. And I was like,
Oh,
it's okay.
mm.
It's okay. But let's maybe have a learning lesson here that it's okay. People can lift heavy things, especially women, and it's actually really good for us.
My favorite thing in the gym is lifting with my husband
Yeah,
and us not having to change the weights
so good.
and people looking and going, "Wait, what? What?" Ooh, but I mean, like, I didn't get access, and I think this really lends into the topic we're gonna talk about, is the
Yeah.
fact that when I was in high school, so I graduated in 2006,
Okay.
we weren't allowed in the weight room. That was for the football players, that was for the baseball players. The women, the girls, we weren't allowed to go in there because that was for the boys, which means I didn't really even have access to a gym until after college because I wasn't a collegiate athlete. I didn't have access to someone teaching me. I didn't know the gym's intimidating when you don't know
Yeah.
how to utilize it.
Mhm.
And it wasn't something I had access to. And that's a problem.
It is. It is. So I have a feeling we're going to loop back into this. Let's start off with just kind of our beginning topic, I would say, of this episode. So first, what I wanted to dive into a little bit is, per our conversation previously, is particular injuries specifically for female athletes that we have a tendency to be a little bit more prone to. What do those potentially look like? And then we'll dive into those bits and pieces after that.
Yeah, and so there's two main ones that, just on a statistical scientific average, women sustain more often than men when it comes to activities across the board. So one of those is concussions. And so when looking at like ice hockey, when looking at basketball, when looking at soccer, if which are pretty comparable. I mean, women's hockey is non-contact.
Sure.
Hear the disgust, understand the disgust. It's non-contact.
Mhm.
So because of that, you would expect there to be fewer head injuries. And yet when looking at NCAA Division One, women are 2 to 3 times more likely to have concussion compared to men. And then for ACL, it is astronomically 5 to 6 times more likely in soccer and basketball for those non-contact knee injuries for an ACL rupture to happen. There is one sport, though, that men and women have equal risk for ACL injury, and that's downhill skiing,
Yeah.
which is really interesting. And I think it's something that we need to take a closer look at as to why that is.
Sure.
In my own like research mindset, is why is that sport where we equal, but other sports we can't get that equatable? And I have theories.
Great. Do you want to dive into the theories now?
Yeah,
Why
we
don't we
can
do
dive into
that?
that.
Let's do that.
So
Because I'm
one of the
curious.
reasons one of the reasons I think is because for downhill skiing, the training is identical.
Yeah,
They
totally.
train identically, they weight train identically, everything is the same and everything is equatable. Therefore, the injuries are the same. But yet when we look at other sports, there is a definitive difference. I mean, and people will be like, no, it's getting better, Title IX. Okay, let's just think back to the NCAA championship gyms that they provided the men's teams versus the women's teams last year, and recognize the fact that okay, some yoga mats and dumbbells do not equate to comprehensive lifting racks. And
Right.
until social media went, oh, that's not right, and a company then donated the equipment to the women's, they finally were able to have the same equipment as, or at least similar equipment to the men.
Yeah.
Because, oh, women don't need to lift heavy. Hi,
Mhm.
what is the best reason we prevent ACL and ligament injuries? Weight training.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I really love this topic too. So because before I start getting into like rabbit holes, the reason why I really like this topic is because I do a lot of triathlon now. I was doing a lot of, well, I still kind of do, but I was doing a lot of CrossFit. Now I'm focusing a lot on triathlon and into like the endurance world and endurance sports. And the one thing that I've seen between the two that is drastically different is that the strength training programs that I've seen a lot of all have their merits for sure, as far as like building a little bit more of those, strength in positions, like you're constantly on one leg when you run, and bits and pieces that go into that. But they have a tendency not to have this whole idea of like lifting really heavy. And I do think that that does play into why we see particular injuries for female athletes, especially in endurance sports. And so, what are some of the things that really go into this idea of like lifting heavy and how it relates to those knee injuries? What are some of the things, like some things that have been discussed? I'll just sort of preload the question, like the QL angle, where for viewers, listeners, that's basically how wide or narrow the hips can be, and then that angle leads to the knees and pressure on the knees. You want to dive into that a little bit? Let's get into like the nitty gritty of some of those things.
Oh yeah. So there has been countless amount of research trying to figure out why ACLs
Yeah.
are more prevalent in women's sports.
Mhm.
And again, there has been discussions on QL angle. So again, hip to knee angle, how wide the hips are, as you said, the size of the actual ACL, the size of
Yeah.
the connection point into the tibia. There has been discussions of the hormones. So with menstrual cycling, how the
Yes.
hormones influence our ligaments, because this is something that isn't overly taught or discussed within the medical realm, that we're more than just a bikini.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
affects more than just our breasts and our uterus. It does actually
Yeah.
systemically affect every aspect of our body. And then the other aspect of is just the frank strength of like the hamstring, which also prevents anterior, so frontwards
Yeah.
translation of our tibia, which is what the ACL prevents. So it's a secondary safety mechanism, is having a strong hamstring.
Right. Right. So,
So
mhm,
where do we go with, and here's my problem with this is we've looked at all these things that are definitively different between men and women. But yet one thing we haven't looked at, and this is actually a research question that I'm working with some students to get answered potentially, is when we know strength training and heavy strength training is the key to preventing injuries in men's sports, when do women get access to it? When are women actually working with a certified strength and conditioning coach? When are they actually being put into a true heavy lifting with Olympic lifting? When are we getting access to that? And I would say for our late 20s, early 30s athletes, they are just getting their toes wet into that realm, listening to the fact that, oh, yeah, you're not going to come out looking like She-Hulk unless you want to look like She-Hulk, at
mhm,
which point you're going to be eating so much protein and using performance enhancing hormones to achieve that lifting is really about creating a stressor that forces change. Our body is a brilliant system that responds to outside forces to create something that's stronger.
yeah,
So, one, lifting heavy is actually really beneficial in preventing osteoporosis, in preventing stress fractures. Why? Because it forces the little cells that build up the bone to do their job, because they go, oh, look, we're under stress. We have to build more.
right.
Same things goes into the ligaments and the tendons. They don't
Yes.
heal well because they don't have blood flow. But if they're put under pressure, the body goes, oh God, I need to strengthen these things, and forces them to be strengthened. So will a singular lifting program prevent all injuries? No. Will it reduce injury likelihood of a non-contact problem? Yes, when combined with other training modalities such as plyometrics and landing exercise, those type
Right.
of activities, you mix them together as you would with a men's team, and magically women's teams respond well too. So are all the differences that make us with the hormones, with the QL angles, do those influence us? I don't know, because we haven't done the important study of, if we just put them in a squat rack, will it get better?
Yeah.
Mm,
Right.
rant. Sorry.
No, you're good. No, you're totally fine. So, and that's the thing, and that's actually the question that I had when you brought up the case study of looking at downhill skiers. If if it really is just injury prevention has a lot in female athletes particularly just has a lot to do with the differences in the way that we're trained. And I would also wonder if that comes down to when we get introduced to it as well, because as you mentioned, like for us, especially, so you graduated in 2006, I graduated in 2008, so very similar in time frame. And I remember playing volleyball, and like my sister and her friend, because they were potentially going to go play in college, they got introduced to weightlifting probably also because they had an interest in it. But then I don't remember ever really being, kind of drawn into that by any means. And I think that's a very interesting thing to think about, and then that led to my sister getting into CrossFit and then her doing her whole jaunt with that. But I don't ever, I just remember, we would go run a mile. Like that was our preparation for our season. And that was like really about it. It was like kind of stay fit ish. And that was really all we got access to. But then the injuries that like plagued all of us on the volleyball team. I mean, it was all of it, right? It was shoulder stuff, it was knee stuff. Like I had the worst posterior tibialis pain you've ever experienced. It was so bad. And I was told to just have orthotics, which is like, again, this is this like really terrible way of looking at like what is going on with the body and just being like, let's just put a brace on it and call it good. That's
Yep.
like honestly, it's the worst. It is the worst physical medicine.
But this is the issue, is the fact that, one, research within women's health didn't really start until the 90s
Yeah.
because we, with our hormones, were determined to influence the research too much and make things
Too
not work
complicated.
out.
Yep.
We were too complicated.
Mhm.
And therefore, a 120-pound man was equivocable, which is why, like, oh, fun fact, if you weigh over 150 pounds, hormonal birth control may not prevent pregnancy. But they don't make that easily known. So
No.
I'm sorry to your listeners if you just started screaming at your speaker, because these are the things that are problematic within the healthcare system. Is it is a very man-centric thought process because our hormones make us too complicated to do the research on, and then they go, and there's no money. That's the other thing. Women's
Yeah.
sports don't have the financial backing because it's too slow, it's too boring, people aren't interested. But yet, because we're but yet, if a athlete performs too well in women's, they then are questioned on whether they are actually a woman. And then new rules are made to ban them because we can't perform
Yeah.
at a high enough level. Yet you look at Michael Phelps, who has a known genetic predisposition to producing less lactic acid, meaning he doesn't get sore, his muscles don't fatigue, and therefore leads him to being able to win multiple gold medals. But that's fine, that's fair.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. We could probably go on this
Oh,
for hours,
we're
I'm
we're
sure.
we're about to get way off
Just
topic, but
yeah.
yes, knee injuries.
But yes, no, well, okay, but it's all part of the conversation though, right? Like creating these conversations, creating the space for these conversations is a very, very important thing because it's part of what hopefully will produce change and move us forward. And that's the whole entire reason for, first off, why I do what I do, and then also why I have this podcast is because I hope that by educating athletes and by educating people that we can move people forward, we can move athletics forward, we can move and make change in this industry because it's just been too long that athletes in particular, but people in general, women in general, have just not received the amount of appropriate care. And this goes for actually men and women in really this case, but like healthcare in general for athletes has suffered. It has not been the
Yeah.
best that it could be for people who are trying to achieve incredible things. So that's the whole reason why I do what I do, but also why we're here is because I really want to like move these conversations forward and try and see if we can generate some change in this industry. So anyway, okay, so ACLs, those are a couple of things, and it's actually really common. If you start kind of looking around and watching athletes, and particularly female athletes, you'll see a lot of ACL tears. I do think that's interesting, and this is actually just a personal question. You mentioned hamstring strength as a
Mhm.
piece of what contributes to that, but it's actually common for us to see more quad dominance, particularly in females. Can you can you shed light on that a little bit about like what I'm talking about there, and then also how that
Yeah.
can lead to imbalances?
Oh, absolutely. So let's start off with quad dominance in women. It is a common issue. It has to do with the mechanics of how, again, the QL angle puts us at an angle, and then the shape of our hips and the fat deposition, aka why we have curves, creates a weight distribution that puts our quads in a dominant state. On top of that, because of where we carry our weight with our chest and our hips, it just our body mechanics, it turns the quads on more.
Sure.
When we have a quad dominance, this actually puts a greater